Hi, my name is Julia Westfall, and I'm the CEO of Hera Hub DC. And many of you may already be aware, but May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And it is particularly important now, given the pandemic and everything that has transpired in the last year and a half, that we really want to shine a light on how people can be aware of how they're doing, and mentally and with stress and everything else. And and just know that there are opportunities out there for them to connect and get support. And so today I'm really excited to have with us Jenny Kellogg. She is the founder of Amalthea Astrology, and she's going to talk with us today, and give us some insight into a lot of things that I believe would be very helpful. So Jenny, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about how you got started doing what you're doing now.
Thank you, Julia. I'm very happy to be here and to be speaking to my fellow Hera Hubettes. I believe that's what we may be calling ourselves.
Yes, yes. Well, and broader community as well, you know.
Yes. So yes, my business is called Amalthea Astrology.
Oh, sorry for the pronunciation, Amalthea.
No problem.
Yeah.
And Amalthea means cornucopia or abundance in Greek, and represents a goddess who nurtured Zeus to become himself and to be able to take his rightful place as the king of the gods. And this reflects my background in Greek literature, Greek mythology. I have a PhD in modern Greek, and I studied classics. I lived in Greece for many years. I worked in nonprofits. And I came to what I'm doing now through a midlife crisis. I think I'll be honest about that. And I was, working in academic and nonprofit contexts and doing many things to help people. But what I really loved was the process of transformation and being with people personally in change. So I did things like I worked with children in refugee camps in Greece. I worked with undergraduates for many years, worked in nonprofits and helping them reach their goals. And what was missing for me, though, was really getting into the process of change and supporting people in their own crises and learning about what that process was all about. So when I transitioned to working in astrology, I was at a point where I was really seeking answers for myself, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And astrology was one avenue that really helped support me in understanding who I am, getting perspective on the cycles of life, because to me, what astrology is correlating planetary cycles to events on Earth. And from astrology, I moved into spiritual coaching or counseling, and the form of psychotherapy that I practice with my clients, though I'm not a licensed therapist, but it's a form of coaching called compassionate inquiry that we'll be talking about today.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. So often I hear from, women or people who've started very different businesses that have come out of their own search to solve some type of issue or circumstance that they're in that just doesn't feel right. And so, the learning process and the work that they do to get to the point where they want to be, it's a process and an experience that I think makes it highly valuable when you're working with people now, because you really understand. And I think that's, I won't say common, but a lot of times I hear that in particular from women who've started businesses, is that they find solutions for their own problems and in turn want to share.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a universal principle of being a helper or a healer, is you have to go through your own suffering and find your way out of it. And then that in turn motivates you to want to share what you learned with others. And I'm sure that many of the members of Hera Hub or people watching this have been through that experience.
Yes, yes, yes. So why don't you tell us more about compassionate inquiry, and really how you use that to help your clients, and what the technique is all about.
Yeah, so I found compassionate inquiry. I started working as an astrologer, and people were getting very emotional, bringing tough issues, trauma into the astrology consultations, and that's not really part of our training exactly. And so I was looking for a method of spiritual counseling. That's what I Googled when I found compassionate inquiry. And compassionate inquiry is a new psychotherapeutic method that's based on the work of Dr. Gabor Maté, who is a well-known public figure in the areas of trauma, addiction, and finding our way back to our authentic selves. So the program's been around for about 2 years, and the goal of compassionate inquiry is to get at what's underneath our stories, the things we tell ourselves about ourselves all the time, whether you call that a negative self-belief or our perceptions of ourselves, getting under the shame and pain, and really starting to find our way back to our authentic selves and have compassion for ourselves. That's why it's called compassionate inquiry, because our teachings are that only when compassion is present can we really recognize the truth for ourselves. So it's a very simple method of inquiry between whether you want to call the clinician, the therapist, clinician, coach. Many people in all different industries use compassionate inquiry, from acupuncturists to yoga therapists to people like me. Anyone who works with clients can learn this method. And it's a process of noticing what's happening in your body, noticing your emotions, and then noticing what your perception of those emotions are. And going back to moments of disconnection from your authentic self. And that's the definition of trauma that we use. That trauma is not the injury, the abuse, the neglect, but the constriction inside of us that, as a result of that shock, that pain, that experience, that we disconnected from our authentic selves, which is to say our intuition or our sense of ourselves or our sense of what is true for us. And we all have trauma of one form or another, because one of the ideas that Dr. Maté puts forward is that our world creates disconnection from the self when we become socialized, especially in this country with structural white supremacy, racism, patriarchy, that the way that we live in our Western world creates a disconnection from our bodies and ourselves.
Yeah, and that even in a again, it just makes me relate to and think of all the people that I've spoken with and things like that. That it really that we are much harder on ourselves and have greater expectations, and treat ourselves sometimes in a way we would never treat a friend or a loved one. So Jenny, can you share an example of what that might look like? So what we might notice happening in our own bodies in a moment that could kind of inform us about how we're doing?
Sure. So let me demonstrate on myself. So in compassionate inquiry, we would take any moment and stop and first notice what's happening in our bodies. So for me, the idea of recording makes me anxious, so I can feel that my heart is beating a little bit faster in my chest. There's a little bit of constriction in my throat. Maybe I start to feel a little bit fuzzy, worried about what I'm saying. That's an interpretation of how I feel. Let me stick with just what's going on in my body. And then from noticing those physical sensations, we would look at what is the emotion underneath. So anxiety is part of the emotion, but anxiety is usually what's over fear. So I would just notice that I have fear present. And then from there, what might I make this mean? So my mind goes to my interpretation of my anxiety or fear. Now, I want to also say that just having acknowledged how I feel in my body right now makes me more calm. I feel more present with you. But then we would look at what is, my perception or my interpretation. And there are all kinds of things like, I'm afraid I won't do a good job, or I'm not a good public speaker, or I'm an introvert. And usually we would then trace that down to what is a core belief. And sometimes, for me, that might be I haven't said the right thing, or because I'm not good enough. And this is a very quick process.
Yeah.
But the more that, say we went on talking for another 10 minutes, but because I've done this, I can remember to wait, let me just, even while I'm talking with Julia, check in with my body. Okay, how am I doing? How is that, my heart beating? Are my feet on the floor? Am I tensing my hands underneath the desk? What's going on for me? And just soften into those physical sensations, as well as making an allowance for the fact that recording this interview makes me anxious or fearful. And so that's an example of what we might do. And this helps me to regulate my nervous system, to acknowledge just the truth of what's happening in this present moment. And oftentimes in this work, after you acknowledge what's true, then there's kind of a backlash, like the shame or the blame or the perfectionism, whatever was the, coping mechanism to survive, survive whatever happened to us, maybe an initial trauma, for example, that can kick in. And so we would continue to look at that. But it helps to just continually bring yourself back to the present. And in that way, compassionate inquiry is a mindfulness practice that has much in common with many of the current mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. And the other important thing, though, about compassionate inquiry is it's something like I just demonstrated for myself, but we teach that having someone witness it, as in terms of playing the therapist role, is what helps the client to feel safe to reconnect to themselves and to heal in relationship with others, in connection and attachment.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. When you were talking about that, it made me think about horseback riding. I guess years ago, I had a horse, and they sense and know everything that you're feeling, right to their core, and they respond and react to your breath, to tension, to softness, to all of that. So that's why I think that experience of riding really made me have to learn how to relax different parts of my body at different times. And my instructor used to always say, unclench your teeth, because I clenched my teeth when I was riding. And I never could really understand how, number one, she could notice it. And number two, how when she said it to me, I noticed it, although I hadn't before. And number three, when I unclenched my teeth, my horse noticed it. So I I'm really thrilled to have had this conversation because I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about why my husband would say to me, Julia, go spend a few hours at the barn.
The barn, yeah.
At the barn, because, you really, because I would always come back
Mm-hmm.
different than the way I went, because it was a stressful time in my career, and I enjoyed my career, but it's so I can really see how that, just your explanation of that, helps me relate to experiences I've had at times where I've gotten where I've been happy,
Mm-hmm.
and with writing made me happy. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so let's just close and by having you share how how you work with people and your clients, and how they can get in touch with you. And certainly we will share that information and when we publish the video, but maybe you could just close with that.
Sure. So I work with people one-on-one, and I have several different services. The first is astrology, and I offer astrology readings to people at any stage of life. And that helps to provide context for who they are, where they're going, and maybe mirror themselves and their lives in a way that is unfamiliar, but hopefully illuminating and helps them to understand the transition they may be going through. I really enjoy working with people in transition or who feel stuck. Then I offer compassionate inquiry, as we have been talking about today. And that is a sliding scale. My rates are sliding scale, and you cannot book that from my website, but you can send me an email if you're interested in a compassionate inquiry session. And then one of the things I've recently added is a type of clairvoyant service, one-on-one, which is a spiritual clairvoyance. It's called Akashic Records facilitation session. And that's looking at where you are in your life at a soul level and receiving answers from, whether you want to call it your higher self, your soul, the divine in any form. I offer that to help people, again, recognize themselves in a different way, and help them feel more comfortable with their life, their choices, and to connect to their authentic self, truly.
Yeah.
So I have a website. It's Amalthea Astrology, Amalthea astrology.com. And I'm sorry, but the maintenance people are just outside, so
Yeah, it
distracting.
happens.
Yeah. And I'm also on Instagram at the same Amalthea Astrology, all one word. Yeah, so I would love to hear from anyone who feels called to connect with me after seeing this.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. It's so important to um, take an opportunity to listen to someone with a different perspective, and hopefully this video will resonate with somebody, and in a helpful way, and be helpful to them as they try to navigate, trying to get even the getting back to our earlier state of normal can also be stressful, and
Exactly.
and that sort of thing. So that's why we want to try to focus on different ways that we can that our members and member community can support people. So thank you so much, Jenny. It was so much fun.
My
And
pleasure.
again, you always are so serene.
Well, and I forgot to mention too that I have some guided meditations.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Go through this process slowed down of noticing what's happening in your body, in your emotions, and in your mind. And those are on the app called Soundwise, or you can
Okay.
find them from my homepage.
Great. Great. Well, that might be a good way for somebody to get to know you a little bit first.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I
My pleasure.
appreciate you sharing, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you, Julia.
Thank you.